There she is.
Mr. Chair, welcome to this meeting. We do have the live stream up and running. So I'm just going to run through the list of participants that we have here tonight. I confirm that we do now have quorum, and all committee members are present with the exception of Councillor Oosterhoff and Councillor Holland, who sent their regrets. As well, Councillor Boehm did note he does have to leave at 7:15 this evening, so I will notify the committee once we lose quorum on that. And staff present with us tonight, we have Paige Agnew, Commissioner, Community Services, Lisa Capener-Hunt, Director, Building and Enforcement, Ruth Nordegraff, Director, Housing and Social Services, Kyle Compo, Manager, Licensing and Enforcement, Derek O'Shea, Licensing and Enforcement Coordinator, Ian Sullivan, our host this evening, as well as myself, Julie McCarty-Jansman, Committee Clerk. We have 4 members of the public with us at the moment, as well as our 3 delegations, Mary Lynn Cousins-Brame, Lindsay Foster, and Scott Merton. So, Mr. Chair, I will turn it over to you to start the meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Clerk. I'll call the meeting to order. That's the first item. The second item is approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or subtractions? Now's my time to put the motion in. Yes, Councillor Sani.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, by that, do you mean now is the time to do the motion, allow staff more time to do the briefing, or is that when it's on the agenda for the briefing?
Yeah.
Now?
Yeah, now.
Okay. All right. So it's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McLaren that we waive procedural bylaw, I think 2010-1, to allow the staff briefing to be 15 minutes instead of 10 minutes.
Yeah, to brief committee on the proposed animal control bylaw. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. The Councillor Boehm, I might point out that we can only see the top of your head. Very good. Still does. And anyway, the point is that's approval of the agenda as amended. All those and I want to make another point, which is that I want to change the order of the business items so that the appointments in B and C come first. They become A and B, and the animal bylaw comes as part C, because the appointments need to get done, and they're not controversial, right? I don't think anyone have anything to say about them. All right, so we'll get that done, and then some work is done, right? So, all right, so in terms of the approval of the agenda as amended, all those in favor? And that's passed. And now third, confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of Thursday, April 22nd, 2021. Any corrections? All the changes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Vote, okay.
No, Mr. Chair, sorry. I didn't get a mover or seconder for that.
Oh, it's Councillor McLaren and Councillor Sani.
Okay.
Sorry, I realize you're not always looking up, so I will remember to do that. Item 4, disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we'll go on to the delegations. I think the clerk indicated it might be a change, but anyway, 5A is Angela Baldwin to speak about fundraising for a new pool. Yes.
Mr. Chair, so that was part of the addendum. So we are, with the approval of the agenda, we withdrew Angela's delegation. So the first one is Mary Lynn Cousins-Brame.
Okay. Okay. So the first delegation is, as just mentioned, Mary Lynn Cousins-Brame, who will speak to us regarding the review of the animal bylaw. There she is.
Good evening. I appreciate this opportunity for this delegation. As you're aware, I am speaking on behalf as a landlord of now 1,500 units of market, RGI, and affordable housing. KFHC is also the biggest affordable developer in the city of Kingston. For years, KFHC has been advocating for changes to the animal bylaw, especially in terms of implementing pet limits and prohibiting exotic and dangerous animals. KFHC has many situations where we have, for example, 26 Chihuahuas living in a 1-bedroom apartment, 30 cats in a 2-bedroom apartment, 100 snakes in a unit, 50 rats. I could go on and on. There are a number of pets in each unit. They're very dangerous. They cause issues for tenants in the community. They destroy the units, they cause damage, and they create smells. They cost the corporation money to repair the units. Many of you are aware of the South African rock python that killed 2 children in the Maritimes. Well, I can tell you here in KFHC, we have such a snake. We have poisonous snakes and Komodo dragons. So we look so forward to the new change in the bylaw with the permitted list of exotic animals. One of the biggest concerns is the pet limits. And I want to encourage this committee, city council, to make the decision that pet limits need to be incorporated. This is required for a safe and healthy and innovative city. That the animal bylaw needs to be developed from a community perspective, meeting everyone's needs and not strictly from a responsible pet ownership. Limits must be placed on all animals, regardless, dogs, cats, exotic animals. It's interesting to note that the current bylaw has a limitation of hens, which is 6. And interesting to note that to have hens on a rental property, the renter needs permission from the landlord. The bylaw needs to allow for landlord rights. In addition, KFHC is also an employer. We need to ensure the safety and well-being of our staff. I believe limits need to be considered. Having limits provides the landlord with a tool for enforcement and monitoring, and it becomes part of the lease and a way to deal with the issues of smell, damage, irresponsible pet ownership. And it would not be a heavy reliance on the bylaw department for staffing or resources. Limits need to be in place and seen as a goal to work towards. Any amendments will be grandfathered in and will not impact the people and their pets now. In the current bylaw, there's a regulation on dog and cat registration. And I know that not all dogs and cats are registered in the city, but this is a goal, and that should be the same way that pet limits are implemented. Having pets, amending the changes to the pet bylaw will help the landlord. We have to deal with animals in our units and on the property, but we need a better way in which to do this. Pet limits should not be connected to low-cost spay and neuter clinics, because I can tell you there's a group of tenants in the community that will never have their animals spayed or neutered. So there should never be a connection to that. People with a large number of animals are not hoarding them, but rather they're breeding and selling them. And this is very hard to prove, but it's very clear to a landlord when visiting the unit that there's a large number of units in there. These tenants and renters are not going to obtain breeder's license. So how would the city ever know that this was going on? It would be through the landlord. Limits need to be set. There's an underground system for breeding and selling of all types of animals, prohibited, exotic, and normal domestic animals. A regulation in the bylaw not allowing for the advertising of dogs, cats, and rabbits isn't going to make an impact. but limiting the pets would. The report states people who hoard animals and have them removed simply reacquire more animals. And this is because they can. There are no limits. KFHC fully supports the changes before. The list of prohibited animals, standards of care, moving barking dogs to noise bylaw, to animal bylaw, and monetary penalties. These changes are helpful, but without limits, what is really going to be achieved? Very little. People can still have 100 snakes as long as they're permitted. They can still have 100 rats, 100 dogs. I think we need to remember that we need to have limits in place. The review of the animal bylaw needs to go further to address all issues and the interests in the community. I want pet limits so I can protect my tenants, the property, and the community. I'm also a steward of the taxpayers' money, especially the property owner, and which most of the funding through the city, that's how it comes to us, as the province supports only about 30% of the funding. I can't go to the city and the service manager and ask for more money. As a landlord, I want pet limits, and I am part of the community like any pet owner. I understand it will be grandfathered, and I have to deal with the animals and pets that we currently have. With pet bylaws and limits, I understand I'm going to have to monitor, enforce, and regulate the pets, but I will also have rights as a landlord. Currently, I don't have any rights, and the pet owners have all the rights. I need pet limits as a tool to address a very complex issue of pet ownership on rental properties. If the city doesn't include pet limits, why is there any changes to the amendments? Because every issue in change in the bylaw results on, for example, the noise bylaw relates directly to the number of dogs or animals. The length of leash, they all relate to the number of animals. Often taking the harder and more difficult.
I'd just like to point out you're approaching your limit.
Thank you. One last comment. Often taking the harder and more difficult route leads to better outcomes. I want to take on more responsibility, but everything comes down to limits. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Cousins-Brown. Committee have any questions? Councillor Sanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. for your delegation. I just wonder, so from your perspective, like with medium density, multi-residential buildings and the units that you have, what do you consider to be like reasonable for the number of dogs and the number of cats in the unit?
So in consulting with my colleagues across the province, as I'm the provincial chair of the Independent Local Housing Corporation, what we find is 4 limits for pets. And that is a combination of dogs, cats, rabbits. That 4 pets in a 2-bedroom apartment is sufficient. I don't think we can, say so many pets per square foot. Is that something to look at? So many pets per unit? That's a challenge, but I think we have to come up with what would be reasonable. And I think looking at 2 to 4 pets in a 1-bedroom apartment, I think would be sufficient.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much. We'll consider your comments. I know I've heard from other councillors in that regard. Thank you. So the Next item is item 6, briefings.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. We do have 2 other delegations that were included on the addendum.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. Sorry.
So
go
the
ahead.
next delegation is Lindsay Foster.
Okay, fair enough. And what's the next one after that?
Scott Martin.
Oh, yes. Okay, fair enough. Okay, Ms. Foster, there you are. And so go ahead, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. And you can hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can.
Good evening. My name is Lindsay Foster, and I'm president of the Kingston Rental Property Owners Association, or KRPOA. First, I would like to go on record that the report submitted for today's meeting does not include correspondence sent by our association in March of this year. That letter outlines our concerns related to this bylaw, and we ask that it be incorporated into future reports on this matter for the committee's consideration. Second, while I may have missed this in the report, there are no updates provided on the dog and cat licensing program in the city, the numbers, the process, recommended changes to better promote responsible pet ownership. I believe this information would be most helpful as staff and this committee assess how to proceed with any changes to the bylaw. We as landlords and property managers of residential rental units in the city are concerned that this review of the animal bylaw does not adequately address the need for pet limits. We wholeheartedly support the hard work and commitment of the Humane Society and other animal welfare groups, and we believe that a low-cost spay-neuter clinic is long overdue in this city. This has been a topic of debate for more years than I can remember, and we're all unclear as to why the city has continually rejected this type of initiative. We strongly recommend that this proposal moves forward. That said, we don't understand why staff is recommending that consideration of the implementation of pet limits be delayed until a low-cost spay-neuter clinic begins operations. While related in some ways, there are 2 very different measures to help promote responsible pet ownership. Ontario's Rental Tenancies Act does not allow rental property owners to prohibit pets. No pets or limited pet clauses can be added as addendums to rental agreements, but they will be deemed void by the Landlord and Tenant Board. It is extremely difficult, if not impossible, especially during the current delays with the Landlord and Tenant Board, to evict a tenant due to a large number of pets, or the smell and or damage caused in and to a property, or substantially interfering with reasonable enjoyment of neighbors. Further, rental property owners are not permitted to collect pet damage deposits or collect compensation for any repair costs without lengthy and costly legal action. Rental property owners across the province turn to their municipalities to set pet limits and promote and enforce pet registrations. Municipalities of all sizes have set limits, as the staff report clearly outlines. It makes no sense why the city continues to defer any decisions on pet limits when our own survey, your own surveys, showed that 59% of residents are in favor of a limit on the number of dogs, and 62% of residents are in favor of a limit on the number of cats in a household. Our association urges this committee to instruct staff to reconsider this position. If not a citywide initiative, rental property owners ask staff to consider setting pet limits within rental properties. We also ask that the city's pet registration process through DocuPet be mandatory and enforced. The system needs to allow pet owners living in a rental property to disclose that information, and rental property owners must in turn be notified. This allows property owners to monitor pet activity and also ensures that all pets are accounted for in the case of emergency, such as a fire. To be clear, our association is not against tenants having pets. For me personally, the vast majority of our tenants who have pets are responsible. They tell us from the beginning that they have pets, or they notify us that they are adopting a pet, which during this pandemic has happened at unprecedented rates. God only knows what's going to happen once everybody goes back to work. As most rental property owners will tell you, problems arise when there are no limits and no disclosure. I can cite a recent example for us personally. A tenant of ours moved out at the end of May. They had multiple cats we did not know about. It's questionable whether there was even cat litter available, because we were left with thousands and thousands of dollars in damage from pet excrement everywhere. The smell is so unbelievably horrid. All the flooring, including the subflooring, has had to be replaced. The tenant is long gone, no idea where, no recourse for us to claim costs. Rental property owners across the cities have countless similar stories. We need help, and this animal bylaw review needs to address these concerns. And as an add-on, I think I have time. Tell me if I don't. When it
You've got
comes to,
about 15 seconds.
the feeding of wildlife, we hope that it's included in this bylaw before it can be incorporated into another applicable city bylaw. We ask for the clause that all feed, bird, whatever is enclosed in metal containers to not attract rats. Rats in the city have been crazy this year, as in every year, but really bad this year, and it causes infestation. So we ask that be incorporated. We also ask that pigeon keeping be restricted to property owners and not tenants. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for your delegation, Ms. Foster. I actually was also going to tell Ms. Cousins-Breen the same information. I just found out today that if you do have a tenant with cats and that has kittens, I found out today that there's a spay neuter clinic already set up underway just outside of Brockville, and the Kingston spay neuter vouchers that are, low income families are eligible for. They get them from social services over on Montreal Street. We give out, I don't know, is it 100 each year or so? Anyway, they are eligible, like they can bring that voucher to that Brockville clinic and it would cover the full cost of the spay and neutering of their dogs or cats with that Brockville one. So if you're interested, I can send you the information for the Brockville one. I know we just heard Ms. Cousins-Breen say that she doesn't think it would make a difference, being able to spay and neuter the tenants' dogs or cats, but I do think that's...
Councillor Sonic, it's great information. It's not a question. So
I don't know. Well, I don't know if Ms. Foster was aware of that. That's
Yeah,
my question.
thank you. No, and I appreciate that, but this goes beyond just spay and neutering. And so that's, I appreciate that. But I don't, there's no enforcement. There's nothing along those lines. So I think that's our biggest concern. And, it's not unusual to walk into a rental property without having disclosure and you see 3, 4, 5 dogs in a 2-bedroom apartment. And it's completely unnecessary and there's absolutely not a thing we can do about it.
Any other questions? There will be time for statements later, opinions and so on. Thanks very much, Ms. Foster. Okay, the next presentation delegation is Scott Martin. Mr. Martin.
Hello.
Make yourself seen, that would be great, but it's not necessary.
I'm having some internet issues here, so it'd probably be best if I left the video.
Okay, so you have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
And could you
sorry,
raise your volume if that's possible?
okay. Is that better?
Probably.
Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. We as community members continue to maintain that the only pigeon keeping regulation truly supported by residents and the only regulation actually required in the updated bylaw is to permit the agricultural hobby of pigeon keeping only in agricultural zones and prohibited in all residential properties. In Appendix B of the report, there are more than 10 emails from citizens opposing permitting pigeon keeping on residential properties, approximately 2 emails from pigeon keepers and or other organizations obviously supporting the hobby. Noticeably absent from Appendix B is any correspondence from any member of the general public expressing support for pigeon keeping. The fact that there is no demonstrated public support for permitting the activity is quite telling and speaks volumes to how citizens truly feel about the proposal to permit up to 60 pigeons in residential zones. Simply stated, residents do not support pigeon keeping in their communities. A few points we'd like to raise from the report. Point number one, pigeons only to be bred for use by owner. So it was researched and cited in dozens of sources and examples previously provided to you, councillors, and city staff, including written correspondence from the Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, and information available on the OMFRA website. Breeding, raising, growing, and keeping pigeons in large wooden barns is an agricultural activity, regardless of whether it is conducted for gain or profit or as a hobby, as an example of a hobby farm. The Canadian Encyclopedia defines animal agriculture as the practice of breeding animals for the production of animal products and for recreational purposes. The OMAFRA identifies pigeons as alternative livestock, game birds, and small flock poultry, which includes hobby birds, show and ornamental birds, and sport birds. Racing and homing pigeons clearly meet these criteria to be defined as agricultural animals. As such, pigeon keeping has never been permitted in residential zones. It should not be allowed to take place on any properties not zoned agricultural. If there's any question as to whether pigeons are bought and sold for profit or gain in Kingston and the surrounding areas, I encourage you to Google pigeons for sale in Kingston, Ontario. Kijiji.ca and advertise.ca are two websites that pop up immediately with dozens of listings for racing and homing pigeons for sale locally. Point number two, best practices from other municipalities. There are more than 21 Ontario municipalities, many in the most recent review of their updated animal control bylaws, have been proactive in their modern best practices in protecting the welfare of the general public and their residents by completely prohibiting pigeon keeping on all residential properties and permitting it only in agricultural zones. These municipalities include Gananoque, Prescott, Smiths Falls, Carleton Place, Peterborough, Arnprior, and Pembroke. Additionally, many of the 444 municipalities in the province defer to their zoning bylaws to regulate the hobby by defining pigeons and pigeon keeping as agricultural, thereby prohibiting it in the respective residential areas. Point number three, maximum number of birds to be kept is 40 between November 1st in any one year to March 31st in the following year, and 60 from April to October 31st. There's no reasonable correlation between permitting 60 untethered and uncontained, when in flight, pigeons in a community compared to 6 egg-laying hens that are confined to a resident property at all times. Hens provide a beneficial food source to Kingston residents. Pigeons offer no benefit whatsoever to any community. Additionally, what becomes of those extra 20 pigeons on November 1st for the owner to comply with the bylaw? Point number four, I believe it's four. The loft is to be located in rear of property that is a minimum 1/3 acre in size. A pigeon loft is the equivalent of a pigeon barn. Lot size and location of the loft are irrelevant, as there is no correlation between the size of one's property and protection from the offensive odor and flight nuisances from the activity. Airborne odors and flying pigeons do not abide by property lines and boundaries. Additionally, 1/3 acre is a very indiscriminate measurement to equate with permissible property size for pigeon keeping. Our research indicates that those Ontario municipalities that actually have incorporated a lot size clause into their bylaws require a minimum half-acre lot size, and many more require a full acre minimum lot size. To our knowledge, there are no municipalities that indicate a 1/3 acre as a minimum size. Point number five, provisions are further set out to carefully mitigate impacts on adjacent residents. Simply stated, there should not be any impacts requiring mitigation, especially for an activity that has been proven to be a known nuisance to the community. This statement implies that residents will be forced to endure and live with some measure of acceptable level of nuisance on a daily basis. We would like to know what criteria will be used to define impacts, how they will actually be mitigated. How will offensive odor nuisances be measured, defined, and mitigated? How will the impact of low-level invasive flight nuisances be measured, defined, and mitigated? And what about the overall negative impact on residents wishing to enjoy the properties? And additionally, human exposure to pigeon droppings has been proven negative health implications. If residents are able to smell the odors from the lofts, and they're being exposed to toxic particles in the air. Pigeon keepers must wear personal protective equipment when they're cleaning the lofts, releasing particles into the air for residents.
20 seconds, please.
Thank you. This clause is completely inadequate, vague, and impossible to regulate and enforce. Flights not permitted between hours of 9 and 5 Residents should never be required to compromise on their outdoor leisure time and activities in order to avoid the nuisance of scheduled invasive flights. Also, there is no language regarding specified time limits of the flights. So would pigeons be permitted to fly from 5 a.m. to 9?
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Okay.
Any questions from the committee? Councillor Stanek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Thanks for your delegation, Mr. Martin. What was the last point you were raising about flights, 5 a.m. you were saying?
Well, right now the time limit is it's basically a no-fly zone from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. But there's no time limit on how long the flights can last. So in other words, as long as the birds aren't in the air after 9 a.m., they could start at 5 o'clock in the morning. And as long as they're not in the air before 5 p.m., they could fly till midnight. Unrealistic, yes, but there's nothing in writing indicating what would be a permissible time limit on these things.
Sorry. And in your opinion, Mr. Martin, what would be a reasonable time limit to allow the pigeons to fly?
Well, given that we consider it an agricultural activity, there should be no consistent time limit. It shouldn't be happening in residential areas in the first place. I wouldn't even know how to answer that. 30 minutes, 45 minutes? But given the fact that it's a residential property and it's an agricultural activity, this goes back. This should not be taking place in a residential zone to begin with. So it should be removed entirely from residential properties and permitted only in agricultural properties.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, we'll go on to what is now 7A, which is report received from the Arts Advisory Committee.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
sorry, we do have the briefing as well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
From Mr.
Oh, I
Combo.
was, okay, that's what I meant to say. I'm going to put the briefing off until we've done these two items, okay? And then it will be continuous through. It'll be the briefing and then we'll have the item, okay? Okay. So it'll be all coherent. Because that's the way it's set up here anyway. So what is now 7A is report received from the Arts Advisory Committee, and part 1 or I is that the working group appointments, and we have to confirm those. I'm just checking to make sure. Okay, and so we don't have any briefing on that. So I'll read it, that the Arts, Recreation, and Community Policies Committee recommends to Council that Alicia Batelier, Gabriel Chung, Mario Courier, Suzanne Fass, Ara Macaulay, and Karina Magazzini be appointed to the Art in Public Places Working Group, that Nadine Baker, Chaka Chikotsi, and Tim Ford be appointed to the Mayor's Arts Awards Working Group. So do I have a mover for that? Councillor Bone, second by Councillor Stanek. Now, any discussion? I'm not going to go to the, I don't think, do we need to go to the public about this, Ms. Clerk?
It is a business item, so we can give them the option. So I'll
Okay.
just, I'll remind members of the public if they'd wish to speak, just to use the raise hand function. But I don't see anyone currently, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So do we have a mover and a seconder, which we should have done in reverse, but never mind. Any comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Okay, so that takes care of 7A. 7B is report received from the Housing and Homeless Advisory Committee Essentially, part 1 or part I is the Housing Homelessness Advisory Committee 2020 report card. And I'll read it, but I'm not going to ask for seconders, movers and seconders. That Arts and Recreation Community Policies Committee recommended to Council, that the 2020 Housing and Homelessness Advisory Committee report card be approved as a summary of the work accomplished by the committee. Now, any comments from the committee? Seeing none. Any comments from the public or questions?
Mr. Chair, I see no hands up.
Seeing none. Do I have a mover? Councillor Bohm, seconded by Councillor McLaren. Any comments? Seeing none. All those in favor? Okay, that passes. Part I, or 2, appointments to the Housing and Homelessness Review Working Group. I'll read it. That Arts, Recreation, Community Policies Committee recommend to Council that Councillor Doherty, Jacqueline Collier, Francesca Crete, and Andy White be appointed to the Housing and Homelessness Review Working Group. I don't want that just yet. Any comments from the council, from the committee? Seeing none. Any comments from or questions from the public?
Mr. Chair, I see no hands.
Seeing none. Do I have a mover? Councillor Bohm. The seconder, Councillor Sanik. All right. Any comments? Seeing none. All those in favor? Okay, that passes. Okay, so those 2 items are done. And remembering that Councillor Bohm has to be gone by 7:15. Okay, so that's what all this rushing is about in the moving around of items. Okay, now understand briefings. I've turned to Kyle Campo, the manager of licensing and enforcement. Welcome. So please proceed.
Thank you, and through your chair, I appreciate the committee's time tonight as we discuss the animal bylaw. It's a very comprehensive bylaw that's had a significant amount of public feedback, and I'd be happy to discuss it with everybody. Next slide, please. Why are we doing this work? The purpose of this report is to provide the Arts, Recreation, and Community Policies Committee with the summary of the proposed changes that are being considered by staff to bylaw number 2004-144, and that's a bylaw to regulate animals, also known as the animal bylaw. Our goal as staff is to update the animal bylaw to better promote responsible pet ownership, incorporate best practices, and clarify any ambiguities. Next slide, please. Public engagement to date. So obviously with a bylaw as the animal bylaw, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of opinions for this. So public engagement is a huge component to this undertaking. Staff recognize that animals are kept for diverse reasons, including as residential pets, for recreation or sport, as service animals, and on farms to support agricultural practices. Therefore, public consultation, again, is a crucial part of the review process in order to gain input from the community. Throughout late 2020 and early 2021, staff conducted a public engagement process as well as identified stakeholders in the areas of animal welfare and responsible pet ownership. In addition to the survey, residents were able to post questions on the project page for staff to respond. A total of 11 questions and subsequent staff responses were posted. Staff for this project, for our public survey, received over 1,200 responses to the survey that was conducted in November. And that was a great achievement for staff, as that was one of the biggest responses that we actually have had for a survey. Next slide, please. So in addition to the public consultation, staff received feedback from the following organizations: Kingston Humane Society, our Trap, Neuter, Vaccinate, and Release operators. So that is the Forgotten Ferals for the Love of Ferals and Kendra's Community Kittens. We engage with the Kingston Area Responsible Pet Owners Group, the Sandy Pines Wildlife Center, Frontenac Federation of Agriculture, Kingston Rental Property Owners Association, Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority, Kingston Federation of Agriculture, Kingston and Frontenac Housing Corporation, Frontenac Municipal Law Enforcement, and the local provincial animal welfare's investigator. Next slide, please. So for pet limits, many municipalities, as we've briefly indicated, Ottawa, Brampton, London, Hamilton, have pet limits on the number of pets per household. Often specific numbers are for dogs and cats. Animal welfare groups such as the Kingston Humane Society and other rescue agencies have expressed concerns with the institution of pet limits. Some of these reasons include being punitive to responsible pet owners, and it does not directly address the overpopulation with pets right now. On the other side, we do have a consultation from our property owner or rental property owners associations, Kingston Frontenac Housing Corporations, as they've identified through delegations, that this could be a tool to help reduce issues with tenants owning large number of pets, leading to property damage and safety issues for building occupants. Suggested pet limits, again, has been indicated or recommended to be based on the dwelling type or size. Hoarding and animal abuse is often cited as justification for pet limits, but through our research, there has been no evidence that directly correlates animal hoarding to pet limits. Next slide, please. So for our public, during our public survey, the results for public pet limits, was generally in favor for both dogs and cats. As we can see, 62% were in favor of cats and 59% in favor of dogs to have a limit on those pets. Next slide, please. So before I get into the pet limits and the high volume, low cost spay and neuter, I did want to just briefly point out, I did hear from the delegation earlier, I can provide the numbers for the licensing in terms of dogs and pets for the past 2 years. So for 2020, the licensing numbers for dogs was 6,008 licenses that were issued in 2020. And 2,380 licenses that were issued in 2020 as well. In 2021, as of May this year, we have had 2,869 or 89 or 69, sorry, dog licenses that were issued. And so far we've had 940 cat licenses issued. So this comes back to one of the topics that staff have discovered and we are proposing as a recommendation for direction to look further into this matter is the correlation between pet limits and a high volume, low cost spay neuter clinic. Pet overpopulation is tied to a lack of spay neutering of pets. Many municipalities that had pets limits have a high volume, low cost spay neuter clinic. High volume, low cost spay neuter clinics provide spay neuter services significantly below market rate, hundreds of dollars of cheaper. So for instance, through the city right now, we have a voucher program that allows about $240 per individual if they qualify for the program to be able to get that service. When we adapt a high volume, low cost spay neuter clinic, the average cost would be around $100 to $120 per animal. So that's a significant reduction. In cats can range anywhere from $100 to $400 and beyond for those spay neuter services as well. Kingston Humane Society is seeking to, Humane Society is seeking to operate a high volume, low cost spay neuter clinic in Kingston, but requires funds for training and purchase of equipment. Staff are considering that pet limits not be instituted at the current time, and staff further investigate potential city support for high volume, low cost spay neuter clinics. Pet limits can be considered when high volume, low cost spay neuter clinics is operational in Kingston. And again, we said Ottawa, Hamilton, Barrie, Toronto, and Windsor are some of the municipalities that have clinics that go along with why they have adapted pet limits. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about permitted and non-permitted species, staff are considering the addition of permitted species schedule to be included in the bylaw as opposed to a prohibited list. The schedule would include all animal species that would be permitted as a domestic animal or worship, and that list is found in Exhibit A of this report. Next slide, please. So permitted species. Currently, there is no restrictions on animal species that can be kept in Kingston. The purpose is to protect residents from dangerous animals and to protect the health of animals that require special care and should not be owned domestically. Animal control orders would be used to require identification of species and would require surrender of non-permitted species to the appropriate rescue organization. So obviously we've heard earlier from the delegation that there's quite a concern for the amount of non-permitted species that are in the area. So again, this is through our consultation that we are trying to adapt these measures. Like we've said, it is supported by Kingston Frontenac Housing Corporation and many other stakeholders. And comparison municipalities would include Guelph, Waterloo, Oshawa, Barrie, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ottawa, Hamilton, Brampton, London, Windsor, Cambridge, Vaughan, and Toronto that have bans on prohibited species list. Next slide, please. So again, when we're looking at our survey results for permitted species, do you support the addition of exotic pet regulations in Kingston? 41% were in favor, 36% were partial ban restrictions on certain animals, 14% were not in favor, and 9% were not sure at this time. Next slide, please. So dog leashing. Currently, there is no requirement for dogs to be leashed in public, but our bylaw currently says they have to be under control of the owner. Staff are considering regulations that require dogs to be leashed when not on the owner's property, other than private property with permission of property owner or using off-leash dog areas. Many dog bites / attacks occur when dogs are off leash. Leashing requirement would reduce potential attacks, ensuring safety of both residents and dogs. Significant public feedback was received in support of leashing requirements and better enforcement. Guelph, Hamilton, Barrie, and Waterloo, Windsor, and Ottawa require leashes with maximum length. Niagara-on-the-Lake, Cambridge, Brampton, and Vaughan require leashes without a maximum length. Next slide, please. So dog leashing, the survey results, dogs should be kept on a leash when not on the owner's property. 49% were in favor for this. We're in strong agreement of this. 26% were in agreement. Neither agree or disagree were 11%, 7% disagreed, and 7% also strongly disagreed. Next slide, please. So for leash lengths, the survey results, would you consider a reasonable leash length to ensure that the owner can maintain control of the dog? A little bit of a split. There's 36% stated that there should be no maximum length. 14% said there should be a 3-meter maximum. 25% said there should be a 1.8-meter maximum, and 21% said there should be a 2-meter maximum. Next slide, please. Dog bites and dog attacks. So under the current bylaw, officers can require a dog that has been bitten or attacked a person or another dog to be muzzled. So we do currently have those temporary measures. The city can pursue charges against the owner through the Dog Owner Liability Act. Staff are considering the replacement of current muzzle provisions with animal control orders that would require the following: a dog to be muzzled, a beware of dog sign placed on the property, property secured to prevent escape, the ban dog from using off-leash dog areas. So it would be a dog ban for using our municipal off-leash areas. The dog to be leashed when in public, no more than a 6-foot leash, and the owner to notify the manager of licensing and enforcement should the dog become at large or the owner move or transfer the ownership of the dog. Orders would be time limited, expiring 2 years after the incident or pending the results of the dog owner liability outcome. Barrie, Hamilton, Toronto, Ottawa, and Oshawa have orders related to dog bites and dog attacks as well. Next slide, please. So dog bites and attacks, the survey results. Should the city, through complaint, investigation, and confirmation, be able to deem a potential dog dangerous, or a dog potentially dangerous or dangerous? 64% of the survey results indicated yes, 19% indicated no, and 17% indicated unsure. Next slide, please. So standards of care. We are considering prohibition of tethering animals outside in extreme heat or cold without providing adequate shelter. We do run into quite a high amount of calls regarding these situations where animals are left in extreme heat or cold situations. The restrictions on tethering unattended on private property would include the owners must provide food, water, and protection from the elements, including the sun, and provide minimum 3 meters tether with unobstructed ranges. So if it's on your property, then the tether should be a minimum of 3 meters. Ottawa, Toronto, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Hamilton, and London have regulations for tethering on private property. Stakeholder feedback while we were engaged indicates support for tethering regulations. Some stakeholders identified need for time limit on tethering on private property. So there is no time limit that we were going to recommend for private property. This is only public property at this time. So the limit for tethering unattended in public, we are recommending a maximum of 15 minutes. So this would be if there's a situation where, again, well, the animals are left unattended on potentially a hydro pole or situations that we are getting quite a bit of calls for the downtown region specifically where these circumstances are happening. Again, Calgary prohibits unattended tethering in public, period. So we are trying to look at a compromise between banning that and allowing a certain measure of that to proceed. Next slide, please. So again, when we're looking at the survey results for public tethering, should the city introduce regulations to prohibit tethering animals in public places, such as outside of a business while shopping? 45% said no, 34% said yes, and 21% were unsure at this time. Next slide, please. So pigeon keeping. Currently, there is no regulations for keeping residential backyard pigeons, and they're also known as racing pigeons. So currently, there is nothing in our bylaws that regulates these animals. Waterloo, Ottawa, Hamilton, Windsor, Mississauga also allow for pigeon keeping on residential properties. Cambridge, Guelph, Markham, Peterborough, Kitchener ban outright or restrict just to agricultural properties. Staff are considering a permit requirement for those seeking to keep residential backyard pigeons like we do for backyard hens, and it would only apply to properties in residential zones. So agricultural areas would be exempt from this. Small number of people keep pigeons in Kingston as racing pigeons. Many are located on agriculturally zoned properties. And for residential areas, we only have one situation where there is racing pigeons in a residential area. Not to say that more could come, but as of right now, there's only one property located residentially. The number of public comments / concerns received on this topic have been included in the exhibit from this report. Next slide, please. Pigeon keeping permit conditions. So this is where we get into the conditions that staff are recommending to the committee for pigeon keeping in residential areas. The conditions would include a minimum lot size of 1/3 of an acre, dimensions for construction of lofts and minimum setbacks from property lines and dwellings, cleanliness standards, maximum number of birds and authorized flight times, membership in recognized pigeon club requirement, owner to take all responsibilities, steps, or all reasonable steps to prevent pigeons from resting and landing on private property, and the prohibition on breeding birds for profit and gain. We do believe that these restrictions would mitigate nuisance concerns that we are seeing. Next slide, please. So again, when we look at the pigeon keeping results for our survey, do you support the addition of pigeon keeping regulations in Kingston? Overwhelmingly 57% said yes, 22% said no, and 21% were not sure at this time. Next slide, please. So dog, cat, and rabbit sale prohibition. So considering prohibition on staff are considering prohibition on advertising a dog, cat, or rabbit for sale for those who are not a licensed breeder or pet store. This will help to penalize illegal or backyard breeders and to ensure animal health. Excuse me. This also encourages people to get their pet, to get their own pet spayed or neutered. It does not prevent people whose pets have accidental litters from giving them away for free. Concerns were raised in this regard by stakeholder groups. Oshawa has a similar prohibition on advertising pets for sale. Next slide, please. So the next steps for staff are that we will consider the comments from the committee and the public when creating the final bylaw amendments. The draft bylaw will be available on the city website 2 weeks in advance to the next council meeting. And staff are recommending the report with the draft bylaw be presented to the August 11th committee meeting. Next slide, please. As I wrap up the presentation, I would like to just quickly also address one of the delegations. They did make a reference to their correspondence, and I do want to let Ms. Foster know that we will be incorporating that correspondence. We do apologize that that wasn't correlated in this report, but it will be into the next August report, and we apologize for that. We do wrap up the presentation at this time, and I ask if there's any feedback or questions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you to the department. Okay, so we'll do this as we usually do, which is we go to the committee first, then we go to the public and come back to the committee. So this is for information. So what I suggest we do, it is now 6:58. It gives us 17 minutes. So if you have comments on the different sections, I suggest you do it in point form so everybody gets their chance and the public gets some chance, okay? And we'll go from there, okay? In fact, Ms. Clerk, would it be better if we went to the public first in this circumstance?
Mr. Chair, we are still in the...
Go ahead.
Sorry. So we are still in the briefing section. So if we want to just move to the business item section, and depending on what the committee wants to do, we can then ask the public and then go back to the committee or...
Right. Does the public actually get a say on an information report? Because that's what this is.
Yep, they have opportunity to speak to the item in the business section.
In the business section. Okay, so I suggest we move there. Which is now 7C of the business section. Okay. So I'm trying to do this as quickly as possible. So I will get Councillor Sanik, you had a point to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you need a mover to put it on the floor, I can move it. And then I thought before we go to the public, maybe Councillor Bohm, if he has any questions he wants to ask about the report, he could go first. And
the problem is when he leaves, we don't have quorum.
Even for an information report?
I will do that, but it won't make any difference to how long this meeting lasts, that's all. And there is no recommendation.
Right.
It's simply for input from staff.
Right.
And from the committee and the public. So thank you for the offer. I realize what you're trying to do. So I'm going to start with Councillor Bohm. And we'll do the committee. We'll do it the way we're supposed to do it. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I guess I'll make my one point, and that's I think from feedback I've heard that imposing some type of reasonable limit on pets, both regular ones like dogs and cats, and as well as exotic ones. I think more consultation would need to be had on that as to what's reasonable, because to one person, having 10 cats is reasonable, but to a neighbor that may have concerns that they're not being properly cared for, it would be unreasonable. But I mean, having no limits at all kind of does set us up for people that you can even have tiered limits where, you know, if you're going to have up to 4 dogs or cats, for instance, you fall within the scope of, you know, this license. If you have more than that, then it needs to be maybe a little bit more. If somebody has 15 cats, are they properly cared for, right? So should there be maybe a little bit more follow-up for somebody that has 15 cats or 15 dogs? Is there a breeder license? So it's kind of, I think the community would like to see some type of reasonable limit. I don't know what the exact numbers are. And also with exotic pets as well, because, you know, if somebody's got 50 parrots, that can be a pretty noisy house. So that's just feedback I'd like to pass on. And I'm sure staff will incorporate that and look at it going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Councilor Bowman. Other councilors, comments? Seeing no comments from anybody? Okay, on the committee. Okay, so I will just say this. I want to say yes to limits. And why? Well, because I have done property management. Okay, and I am also a member of the community. And I heard very clearly what Ms. Cousins-Brown and Ms. Foster said, and it is true. The damages are terrible, but the thing that most gets me about this is, other than huge damages and that are possible, is the effect on neighbors and health conditions. And so I think it's reasonable to give a limit, especially in multi-residential situations. And maybe we can talk about that again another time, okay? But so I'll just stick to that. And I don't also think there should be a permitted and a not permitted species list. And I'll say why not permitted, some are egregious, okay? And don't fit into an urban circumstance. And and even if it's a very limited, it's a start. Presumably we can get general agreement on that about certain species, and protects the species too. I thought Komodo dragons were protected in some way. And here we are talking about them being in Kingston. That seems odd to me. So also I think there should be leash limits, okay? Like maybe 3 meters or something. I think a lot of people think there already are, but apparently, according to what staff said, I understood that there is not. So that's it. That's all I've got to say. So if there's anything else from the committee? Seeing none. Okay, we'll go to the public if they have comments. Those who presented, if you're allowed to speak again, but please make it very brief. And I will give you like a minute, okay? I'm the chair, I can do that. So, if you want to emphasize something. So, Ms. Clerk, if you care, call on the public, please.
Mr. Chair, we have Dana Babcock has her hand up, so I'll invite her to speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Just for context, I am Vice President of the Chair of Board of Directors of the Kingston Humane Society. I just have 3 very quick points that I will make, and then if you want me to discuss them further, I can discuss them. I have a concern in regards to the dangerous animal section of the bylaw in regards to confirm the species or breed of the dog. I'm not sure what value that would add to our bylaw. I'm going to assume that the staff are referring to the pit bull ban in Ontario, but pit bulls are not a breed. There is physical characteristics to define what pit bulls are for our ban in Ontario, and defining the breed of dog has no value in our bylaws. My second point is the limits of animals. We do have concerns in regards to what that is going to look like in terms of surrender. The first speaker, she spoke for advocating for pet limits due to the issues of smell and damage. Yet the second speaker, she didn't even know there was cats there before she knew that there was damage. So it's not always going to be enforceable by the landlord. Also, if you are going to put a provision of pet limits, I do advocate that there is an exception made for foster animals for a registered rescue or shelter. And my last comment is not as a Board of Directors Humane Society person, it's just a personal comment on this pigeon keeping. The question I felt presented was very vague, and I actually voted yes to limits on pigeon keeping because I assumed that that would place limits, not that in the way it was presented today, it looks like I actually want pigeons. So I do think that pigeons should be an agricultural activity, and from a humane animal perspective, we really, like, the Kingston Humane Society does not overly accept pigeons, that they're not included in the City of Kingston animal control bylaw, like in the contract we have to accept pigeons. And some of the provisions that are put in, I'm concerned for the care and welfare of the pigeons and of their neighbors. If we only have one person that has pigeons in Kingston, clearly we have one person that objects to them. So in 100% of cases and where we have racing pigeons, we have neighbor conflict. So those are my points. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public?
Mr. Chair, I see Marg Buckwoltz has her hand raised. I'll invite her to speak.
Sure. Go ahead, please. Hello? Ms. Buckwoltz? Perhaps?
Mr. Chair,
I think, well, just 1 second.
the clerk, is it possible, can you unmute Ms. Bo?
Yep, we have asked. Oh, there we go.
Oh, great. Okay, Mark.
I'm not very technologically savvy. Anyway, the woman from the low-cost housing has previously conceded that almost all the cats that are causing trouble are not spayed or neutered. I mean, is there any way you could consider this issue with the pet limits? I think there is a city that has no limit on the number of spayed and neutered, only on the unspayed and unneutered. Have you considered that as an option?
That we'll leave that and staff will respond after all the comments.
Okay.
That's the practice of committees and council. Go ahead. Any other comments?
No, that was my thought.
Okay. All right. Now I'll let we'll let staff respond to that one question that was asked by the last speaker.
Just in regards, thank you, and through your chair, in regards to if we are able to consider pet limits only for non-spayed and neutered animals, yes, it is a consideration that staff can take into.
Okay, thank you. Now, back to the committee. Given that, Ms. Clerk, you can confirm there are no other public hands raised?
I see no other hands, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, coming back to the committee. Councillor Sanic, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question. So in the report where it says to try to combat illegal breeding and selling of pets online, for example, on Kijiji, Facebook, does staff think they have the capacity to monitor that? Okay. I think we have been doing it as part of the responsible pet ownership program that we've had, like for the last 8 years or so. Do we have the capacity to continue to monitor those sites to try to track down on those people in a unit, in a house, breeding a bunch of kittens, and then, trying to make some bucks on the side by selling them.
Thank you, and through your chair. I do believe so, Councillor Osanik. I do believe that it would give enforcement another tool to be able to use to eliminate illegal breeding that's happening right now. We are receiving several complaints the past year in regards to the situation that there is illegal breeding that's happening. Our officers, we have been monitoring that. But I think also it can be based on a reactionary system as well, based on complaint. If there is a complaint, that we are able to have further measures to indicate that there is illegal breeding, excuse me, illegal breeding that's happening with those individuals.
Okay. Back to any other comments from the committee? One that I forgot to say myself, not seeing any others, is I don't think, unlike the report, I don't think there's any reason to wait for spay and neuter clinics. Oh, we did have one at one point. Remember, we paid into it and we have the vouchers, but perhaps that's not good enough, and I'm glad we're going to look at it further. But the direct connection between limits and spay and neutering, it appears to come in the report. Or I'm sorry, I don't buy that. Okay, I think the limits could be set, but as was pointed out by one of the presenter or delegates, some people just simply won't do it, or they won't feel they can't afford it, or they don't want to afford it. There's all kinds of reasons. Now, that's no reason not to do spay and neuter clinics, but it is a reason not to. It is a reason to treat limiting and spay and neuter as separate concepts and parallel policy. So that's all I've got to say about that. So it's 7:13. I have 2 minutes to wrap this meeting up. So any other comments from the committee? Seeing none. So item 8, break in here, Ms. Clerk, if I do something wrong, is motions. There are none. 9, notices of motion, none. Other business, item 10, none. 11, correspondence. There was some on the addendum. The item 12, date of next meeting is Wednesday, August 11th at 6 p.m. And 13 is adjournment. Do I have a mover for adjournment? Councillor McLaren. Councillor Bohm will second. All those in favor? Passes. Thank you to staff, Ms. Clerk and Mr. Compo and others. And thank you to the public. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair. Great job, Rob. Appreciate it.
Okay.